Hi, Jay.
Hi.
Hi all, we'll just take a few minutes to let people enter and we'll get started. For those of you that are just joining, we're just going to take a couple minutes to let people filter in, and then we'll get started. We are going to record this session like we've recorded the other sessions, so just be aware of that. As more people filter in, I'll explain this view that I'm showing in a minute. This is the aggregate set of sparks that we've created here in the middle. Hey, these things are sneaking into my barrier. I'm trying to create a spark barrier. Don't get in here yet. Get out of here, logic. Get out of here, continuous improvement. Okay. While we're waiting, we'll wait maybe just a couple more minutes for some other people, for anybody else who's filtering in. Maybe while we're waiting, I'd be curious to just hear if anybody has any sort of report outs they want to give about their experience in any of the sessions so far.
I will say your little soundbite from just a few seconds ago, get out of your logic, get out of your continuous improvement, is going to be the best little clip it for next year as well.
Yeah, well, this is why we have to make sure that we record all the sessions, because you never know when we're going to have those gems. And speaking of, I really liked you. I think you created a first version of your lightning talk, and then you and was it David who was your colleague on that? You guys uploaded a new version. I really enjoyed that you kept the outtakes in the beginning, and yeah, that was great.
That was Dave's curatorial decision. There was a lot of content that he did not add in, and I think he probably chose wisely as to what he said.
Yeah, I thought that was great. So we'll maybe wait 2 more minutes. How about if anybody from, let's see, I wasn't at Kim's talk. Any report out from that talk? Anybody want to talk a little bit about the gist of what came out of that session?
One of the things that I can say about it was it was surprising how everything kept coming back to conversations we'd had earlier in the day, right? As disparate as some of these conversations were, you know, there was things that were, you know, brought back, right? Like there was a conversation about sentiment analysis that was brought up in the very beginning session and this morning, you know, really could apply to a lot of ways in which we collect data. And then, you know, the whole thing about data visualization and how data cleaning and data visualization, the way things are portrayed, really does it's filtered through biases that we have already. One of the Kent was actually talking about in Kim's talk about how much power a graduate student who is cleaning data has over determining what gets pulled out of the data. So
it's great to hear, you know, from the perspective of some of the, you know, the sessions I was in. We just got out of a really interesting conversation with John around better testing, and it was interesting to see the directions that took the conversation. We ended up talking about stakeholder engagement. We ended up talking about team signatures and modeling uncertainty in graphs. And again, to your point, Terry, it was interesting to see how these things started to intersect with each other. Anybody else have any observations they want to share from the sessions they were part of? The quiet, I actually view as a nice validation of the value that a cognitive city view can bring as a prop to the conversation, because I think it can drive conversation around certain topics when it's sort of hard to find the right entry point. And what I'd like to do in this session, which is really about knowledge integration, and, you know, Terry, feel free to co-facilitate this one with me and jump in if you hear things people are saying or see things in the network that you want to pull in. But in this session around knowledge integration, I want to do something different than what you've been doing so far this morning. You know, this morning you've seen how we've used the network and the edges in the network to, you know, drive the conversation. For example, we just came out of a session that I was in where we talked a lot about strategic planning, and that connected to, you know, I now have some of it memorized. It connected to Mitch and it connected to Tom. And so we were able to drive the conversation that way based on navigating the edges between these things. In the view that I'm bringing up now, I'm intentionally getting rid of the edges. And I want to do a little bit of an experiment with you all now around integrating some of the ideas that we've produced together. First of all, we've got 31 Sparks in the city, and I just want to point out that there were no Sparks in the city, you know, as of yesterday or this morning. Like, these all got entered between last night when people started watching some of the lightning talks and the presentations individually, and then over the course of the day as people thought about the content that came up. So, you know, quantity does not mean quality, but you can't have a good idea if you don't have any ideas. And so I think it's encouraging that we've generated, you know, a few dozen ideas that we can come back to and think about how they integrate. We also have 30 methodologies that people entered as part of signing up. And we have, you know, almost 40 different subject areas. And this was really based on people gathering around these 10 specific presentations between the lightning talks and the longer talks. So now what I'd like to do is think about how these things might work together. Terry said in her session, it was interesting how we kept coming back, or they kept coming back to some similar concepts. this is what I'm going to propose is a bit of an organic process and involves a little bit of searching. And I think there's some value in that kind of non-linearity. I built this ring in the middle, and I'm going to let anybody propose some items that we want to pull together into the middle that kind of work together. You might start with a presentation, like this. You might start, some of these other things are going to try and float in. You might start with a particular spark that perhaps stuck out to you, maybe because you entered it or because it got you thinking about something that you hadn't thought about. This is one that I just entered based on a conversation that Natalie had in the previous session working with uncertainty in graphs. So we're going to get a little bit of content in the middle, and we're going to mix colors. And you might say, what on earth are we doing? But trust me, it's going to be fun, and you might be surprised what comes out. So who wants to start? We need to get some kind of starting node in the center, which we're going to sort of build a collection of nodes around. Anybody want to suggest a node that we pull into the center first?
I got a couple nodes. So Terry's comment coming out of the last session kind of on racial inequality with COVID and like pulling from other sessions really resonated with me. So watching Adam and David's video this morning, I created a spark about co-production with artists. So one of the things that really stuck out to me was Adam's background in like art modeling and how that really like had clear application to like the holders they were building. And when we were talking about like racial inequality around COVID, the visualization that they had was very much around like human stories. So it really came off to me like artwork. So it seemed like another like great opportunity for co-production, like technical data science and like designers and artists. And I don't think Rob's on the call anymore, but he actually is like doing a sabbatical right now through our installations to like kind of push forward like how our surroundings and like buildings like connect us to nature, again through like the perspective of art. So I just have like seen this like art or science as art like coming up in a number of conversations.
So thank you. Let's start there. This isn't gonna be the only constellation that we put in the middle. We'll spend a few minutes on this one, and then we'll clear out the middle and we'll do it again. So if this sort of constellation of concepts isn't resonating with you the most, that's okay. Let's go with it, and then we'll do another one. But now let's open it up to other things that might fit in with these starting concepts. So I brought social justice in. Was there something specific to racial inequality? And let me just check. Are you guys, it's important that you can read the text through my screen share. Is the text big enough for you to be able to read? Okay. So allow yourself to kind of scan this and let your thoughts go with this idea of racial inequality and co-production with artists. Do you see any other nodes that might make sense to get combined in the middle?
Health disparities.
Okay, so now what you have to do is you have to help me locate them. So give me like on a clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 6 o'clock. Oh, here it is, 6 o'clock. Health disparities, okay. What else? And if you need me to move anything or click on anything, these are I'll try and make these so you can read them all.
Communication at 3 o'clock.
Communication at 3 o'clock, okay.
Improvisation up there, kind of around 12:15.
I realize that this method is going to test whether I can still read an analog clock.
How about coaching right around 4 o'clock on the outer perimeter?
Coaching, okay. Let's look now for, so one of the things that I've found is successful here is to balance our colors and our icons a little bit. So we have a few subject areas, we have a couple methodologies. What about some of the presentations that feel relevant or potentially capable of being integrated with the concepts we've put in the middle?
Probably viz responsibly around
Oh,
11.
yeah. Okay. Is responsibly.
Kim's talk as well.
Yeah, let's find that one. Intersecting pandemics. Okay, now let's maybe look at a couple other sparks. So we started with the co-production of artists. Let's see if we can find a couple others that might combine with these ideas.
There was one on sentiment analysis.
Mm-hmm. Here we go. Oh, forgot. Hold on. Incorporating sentiment analysis.
I think maybe that spark on shifting from outbound to inbound or co-productive models somewhere up there around 11-ish.
Here we go. Can we show? Okay. So now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to zoom in. So forget about all of the other items. Let's just think about these. Co-production with artists, sentiment analysis. Let's look at these sparks for a second. So adding sentiment analysis to COVID Black. Oh, this must have been a spark that came out of incorporating sentiment analysis to the termscape. This is I remember somebody talking about this one. Co-production with artists is what Austin mentioned. So this was sort of 3D modeling as an art discipline, as much as engineering, novel shape designs. This one that Natalie just mentioned was one that we talked about in the last session. So can we shift from an outbound model of stakeholder engagement to an inbound model, meaning instead of going out and trying to talk to each of the stakeholders, can you get the stakeholders to come to you? And John Collins talked about, you know, the challenge when you might not know exactly who your stakeholder group is. How does that have to do with it? We have responsible visualization that Jeremy talked about, intersecting pandemics around race and public health. And then some interesting topics and methods: coaching, social justice, health disparities, communication, improvisation. So what I want to see if we can do is kind of co-create an idea, a new spark that pulls together some of these ideas. And this is an experiment. There's no wrong answers, but what I've found is the discussion can sometimes bring us to some interesting places. So any thoughts on what a project, if you wanted to not just have a spark, but if you wanted to do something that built on these ideas, does anybody have any thoughts about something you might do or explore? And let's keep this in a COVID-19, you know, COVID-19 context. Like co-production with artists is very, you know, can be very broad, but we want to try and add value to the COVID-19 community.
Dave, can you rephrase the ask?
Yeah, so let's think about this set of topics, and can you propose a kind of project that might emerge relative to COVID-19 that plays on these ideas, even if it's just very loosely formed?
So there's like, I have a couple of ideas, but what I'm reminded of is that XKCD comic about standards, right? You know, like they're creating creating something that has a humanistic approach to the data, except it's got the same problem that most of them has. Like, how do we disseminate it? One of the lightning talks was about COVID commitment, which is beautiful visualization, but there was like less than 1,000 people who'd it had reached. So there's like that's one of the things that came up for me as like the again, the challenge of dissemination, and how do we disseminate it in the right way and to the right people, and especially given the inundation of information that you spoke about this morning.
When you think about dissemination, do you link that to a particular aspect of what's here? For example, do artists have channels of dissemination that maybe others don't? Or is, shifting from outbound to inbound, that sort of brings up concepts of dissemination? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, from Natalie's talk this morning, she actually asked us how we get our information. And so, we had a poll, and, a lot of people, of the people who were in the room, Twitter seemed to be the most common way people got information on COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if it's an art project, that Instagram would be much better. I mean, that's like a visual version of Twitter. Not exactly, but in a way. And with the hashtags, then you can get the information to the people.
I like this idea of thinking about, the artists, and also, Natalie brought in stakeholders. Do the artists represent a different stakeholder group, or do they represent the ability to reach a different stakeholder group? I'm just thinking, when Jay was talking about Instagram versus Twitter, is that reaching a different population? And is that a population that might be valuable to reach from some sort of perspective of COVID?
Well, as somebody who's active on both Instagram and Twitter, it is a very different population, because one's just word-based, and in fact, it's harder to post pictures on Twitter and from a single place. So and I'm communicating something very different when I'm on Instagram versus when I am on Twitter. And if there was a way to communicate data in a way that grabbed your interest or grabbed your emotions, I think Jay's right. It would be better handled by Instagram.
There are a number of COVID related hashtags on Instagram. I'm just going to put one that I grabbed. I never looked at these before, so I don't know how good it is, in the chat window, and you can see some art.
We've got a few. I'm checking the chat window just to catch up. Natalie, thank you. Put in the comic that Terry was talking about. Let's see, how standards proliferate. There are 14 competing standards. 14 ridiculous. We need to develop one universal standard that covers everyone's use case. We now have 15 competing standards. Let's look at COVID-19. Is this really the Instagram pictures related to COVID-19? Why do they all look like modeling shots?
I know, I'm sorry. I just grabbed
No. I mean, I think there's no wrong answer here. I mean, I think this is actually kind of interesting when we talk about, search and signal to noise. Oh, now it's going to make me log in. Okay. I don't have an Instagram account. So let's, here's a different, let's see if it'll let me look at a few of these. So these are some resources on Instagram.
Oh, this isn't a very good one, sorry.
That's okay.
I mean, the hashtags for COVID and what they're providing, I don't think are very good, because COVID, you don't think of it immediately as art or some kind of maker type thing. So some examples of other types of art might be better, just to see what would be available. You can combine the hashtags with the COVID hashtags with the art hashtags, and maybe get a different result.
I'm curious whether Adam has a perspective, because it seems like it was his lightning talk that kind of got Austin thinking down this path. And so, Adam, when you talked about, you know, art and engineering, what was in your mind when you were describing that?
Sorry, I took one on mute. Really, I was just talking about my own background, but the reason I've been quiet is I'm trying to factor in, you know, I'm working on a couple of other projects. One involves muralism in Chicago. And usually when I think of arts or people that are producing arts, it is from their individualized perspective upon a social condition, right? That's, you could probably take that of every art textbook, you know, in the first half paragraph. And if we're talking about communicating broad information about the, you know, this is the consolidated COVID experience, and trying to get that down into individual artistic lenses, we're talking about communicating in the opposite, you know, lane of that tunnel. So it'd be interesting to see how you'd have the opportunity to effectively, if we're talking about disseminating information down in conjunction with artists, it's almost as though we're talking about presenting them with a certain amount of materials or motifs or collage information that they could then reassemble in their own adaptive lens. And you know, then they would have to find their own ways to produce that. People that see themselves as primarily like high-level production artists are going to use Behance. You know, Instagrammers are going to be more reactionary, and you're probably going to find much more of an urban bent to a lot of their vocabularies and their visual cues. So it's interesting to talk about how you can stage a dialogue with artists and have them provide reactionary content based on the same, you know, group of 30 motifs. That's it goes back and forth. That'd be a difficult one to pull off.
Well, this just generated you know, a spark for me, which is that I was looking at, you know, incorporating sentiment analysis or adding sentiment analysis. And when we use the term sentiment analysis, we tend to think about a computer program figuring out the sentiment of something. But what you just made me think about when you talked about sort of artists responding to some set of conditions is that it seems like part of what happens with art is it is a sentiment analysis. Like the artwork, you know, is conveying a sentiment through the lens of the artist or the set of artists. And I actually wonder if there's an opportunity to read sentiment analysis not as an artificial intelligence thing, but as a human, as an artistic intelligence opportunity to sort of take some fodder where maybe we're not sure the sentiment or there's multiple sentiments. For example, in Jeremy's talk, he showed 2 different data visualizations about deaths in Iraq, and they had very different sentiments in terms of how the colors were used and how they were portrayed. I wonder if there's an opportunity to let artists do that kind of analysis and put a sentiment onto how they're interpreting the data or fodder that they're given. Other ideas on this? If not, what I'll do is I'll pull these out of the center and we'll pull a new constellation of nodes into the center and see where it takes us.
Can I say something, Dave?
Please, yeah.
So I'm just basically trying to struggle with the exercise itself here. So it does seem like we are focused on communication. But I'm trying to figure out who we're trying to communicate with and what that communication is supposed to accomplish. If I look at other things like health disparities, social justice, coaching, I'm kind of at a loss as to the connection between communication and health disparities and social justice, simply because I'm not sure how much of a factor communication is playing in those issues, as opposed to, let's say, economic factors that place certain ethnicities in much higher risk jobs like retail or something like that. So I think that's sort of where I am on this exercise. There's some missing pieces here that are making it difficult for me to kind of connect all this up.
Thanks. Let's see if we can fill in a couple gaps. I think, the one you identified here is, if we just think about communication, who might we communicate to? Go ahead.
I could see sort of different strategies for communicating with the political class, which should be the target of our communications, especially if we want to address things like social justice and health disparities. But I could also see, wanting to communicate to the general public if we're dealing with health disparities that, have to do with putting other people at high risk. Then maybe people have to be made, more aware that wearing masks will protect other people. And, what is the communication channel for that? Apparently that's not been very successful here, at least in Oklahoma. So what can be done about that?
I think this is a really great sort of focusing question. Does anybody want to dive into sort of either of those two areas, like communication to the political class to drive policy, or communication to the population to drive mask adoption?
Well, I would say go down the middle and communicate with journalists. If we're talking about repositories around COVID, then they're the people who can get the information out to people and to the political class. And they have skills in making sure that the information they get out is accurate and well documented.
Thanks. This is another group. Other thoughts? John, did you go off mute?
Yeah, I just did, because unfortunately these days, journalists, people only read the journalists that they trust. So I'm not sure that that's going to be very helpful. But I wonder about celebrities, frankly, for a lot of the people that need to be convinced that they'll listen to the Kardashians. So anyway, I don't mean to be too flippant about it, but that might be a better way of going.
This actually dovetails with something I was thinking, which is not just communication, but sort of communication to change somebody's mind or to affect behavior, which I think, Bob was sort of getting at that in the 2 points he came up with. And I feel like John was just sort of getting at that in terms of who people listen to. And one thing that's really struck me is that, people tend not to change their mind because of the facts or the data. They tend to change their mind due to some sort of emotional connection to either who's telling them the information or an emotional connection to what's being given to them. And so coming back to this co-production with artists, I feel like artists do have the ability to create an emotional connection with people in a way that us tech data visualization people haven't quite mastered as much. And I wonder if there's an opportunity there to use art to actually drive behavior change.
I totally think there is. I put in the chat a link from a recent graphic art set of panels or a cartoon from Katie Dowdy, and I think it's awesome because it shows the artist's sensibility about infographics and telling the truth with data visualization, but also their sensitivity to the way we can see in the collapsing bar chart up there on the left, that in a pandemic where science doesn't have all the answers, because the answers are constantly changing as we gain more information and try and reproduce each other's results, that we have to constantly keep telling the story. And artists are good at helping people understand the story in both a linear and an emotive way that can encapsulate the values in data visualization that has a high degree of veracity, but also in a compelling way.
I don't know if anybody else is having this experience, but to me, this is starting to get more tangible, like thank you, Natalie, with this example. And I think Bob sort of trying to hone in on who's the audience and what's the message. Like now I find myself thinking about trying to drive compliance basically, or action. John, I'm curious, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second. We were just in a session where you were talking about the RADx Tech program and developing COVID testing, productization, commercialization. Is there anywhere in your process that you think about messaging and adoption or compliance? Like if you develop a test that people are scared to take, or for example, a vaccine that people are scared to take, then it doesn't do any good. Is this something you think about in your team?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a whole group that's been focusing on the adoption issues. And there's some simple things that they're doing right now. Is again, I think the big issue we're putting healthcare responsibilities on people with no experience in healthcare. So how does a school superintendent know how to put in place a testing procedure? What are the appropriate tests? What's it going to cost me? So all of those issues, we're basically pulling together a number of scenarios and tools that people can use to help them understand what the implications are. And also things like, well, if you wear masks, what is the likely infection rate versus not wearing masks? So, it isn't only about the test. What we're trying to do is provide resources. And again, our focus tends to be a little bit more on those folks that will be managing the tests to help make them successful.
Do you, I feel like it's easy for the sort of scientific world and the artistic world to have a bit of a stark divide. I think that, this example that Natalie shared is such an interesting one because it really is walking that line where it's easy to look at this as a comic. It's also easy to look at it as an infographic or as an instruction manual. Have you thought about the role of art, or maybe sort of like, I'm going to say, less traditional messaging avenues in some of your initiatives?
I'll admit I are an engineer, so the answer is no. and we will.
Yeah, no, that's great. Any other, other thoughts that this generates for people?
Well, I think it becomes clear that art is underutilized in communicating things that are difficult to communicate. All I see on the news is more and more statistics. If they showed this cartoon or comic, I'm not sure what to call it, that Natalie shared, would there be a different reaction from people?
Mm-hmm. Let me close the loop for a second back to Bob, to put you on the spot, Bob. I was appreciative of your comment about sort of feeling stuck in the exercise. And, I think you sort of got us unstuck a bit by trying to get more specific. It's still pretty vague, don't get me wrong, but I'm sort of curious whether this round of conversations has gelled anything for you or generated any new thoughts.
It's helped. And I started actually thinking about art mostly in the context of a communication channel. So the communication channels we've talked about are kind of the more traditional ones: Instagram, Twitter, which to me, in my community here in Edmond, Oklahoma, would probably not be especially effective. Facebook, it's a cesspool. Really, I think here we need to, have a good ground game, and we need to reach some community leaders, for example, in the churches, which is going to be challenging. And I'm trying to imagine how art could actually facilitate that.
Mm.
Dave, I think you remember a while back, a long time ago, we had a meetup talk And there was a discussion about dealing with epidemics in Africa and how the most effective strategies for getting the most effective communications channels were you had to really reach community leaders in the small communities. I think that's probably going to be the same case here, that we're going to have to actually reach people in the business community, in the religious community, and get really down and dirty local to try and change the minds here.
That's interesting, you know, going back to sort of what channels do artists have, like the local channels, the grassroots channels that might be sort of more available to certain artists than other channels. I was thinking about the first thing you mentioned, Bob, which was the politicians, and this is meant as an and, not an or to the discussion. But one thing I was thinking is that it seems to me that the politicians that are driving our policy are kind of no longer scared of the things I wish they were scared of. Like, what I mean is, I wish they were scared by the facts, right? I wish they were scared by the actual numbers, but they've sort of figured out how to spin that to the point that it doesn't matter. I wish that they were scared by the opinion of, you know, scientists or researchers. I wish they were even scared by their constituency or by the aggregate vote to a certain extent, but they've figured out how to like game that system through, you know, through gerrymandering, for example. But I just find myself wondering whether politicians are scared of powerful artists. You know, they say the pen is mightier than the sword. Maybe it's not the journalistic pen, but maybe the artistic pen still has some weight in public opinion. You know, they're not as scared of the protests as I wish they were. So, you know, is there a way that art still can evoke respect, perhaps, from the political class in a way that some of these other things haven't? I don't know, just some musings there.
I think what we're kind of discussing is that the CDC basically needs to poach some talent from the New Yorker.
Yeah, I mean, so this is an interesting concept. On that topic, let's sort of like, I'm gonna zoom back out, like on that point, I'm gonna zoom back out. I'm gonna pull these things back to their, you know, back to the edges. I think we have time to sort of do one more example. And, you know, what I'm hoping you sort of felt through that process, even if the topic, you know, was foreign to you, was I hope you kind of enjoyed the process of taking something really foreign and starting to kind of collaboratively shape it into something that started to get some more defined contours. And let's try that once more with a sort of different area. And then, Terry, this session ends at 1:30, is that, or 1:30 our time, is that right? Half past? If I remember correctly. Yeah. So let's take 15 minutes now that we've sort of done the drill once. Let's try it one more time, and then I'll tell you what our next steps can be sort of post-conference. Does anybody want to take a stab at sort of suggesting a starting area? Let's start with a spark, one of the sparks here. I'll select them here.
I think one of the things that's plaguing right now is the idea of uncertainty in data and how trustworthy it is and how that relates. So I would love to start with a spark of in the working with uncertainty. Was it about 2:15?
2:15, thank you. Oh, there it is. Okay, that worked. All right, working with uncertainty in graphs. So just to help put this in perspective, you know, Natalie and I were talking about this in John's session. Graphs are powerful tools for use cases where other data models fall short, but one challenge of working with graphs is that they aren't great for modeling and working with uncertainty. And so I mentioned that, you know, we've been using something that's called property graphs because we think there's ways that you could use metadata to make some of these nodes more opaque or more transparent if you were more or less certain about them. Or for example, if you had a connection between people, you could make that connection wider or narrower, or you could put error bars on that connection or error bars on the node. So I'll say Natalie and I just put this out at the end of the session. It's not well formed. Let's spend 15 minutes to see where the group can take it. What else might we pull in to the center with this Spark?
I'm really interested in stuff that helps viewers understand the differences between probability and uncertainty, and methods of visualization that don't conflate the two in ways that are misleading.
Oh, so I know that somewhere here there's statistics, right? Didn't we have, because when you talk about probability versus uncertainty.
Yeah, if there was a probability,
sure.
we would have a pandemic. We didn't know it would be coronavirus. If there was a probability, we would have a pandemic. The other way of thinking about it in terms of decision making or strategic planning is that we can't anticipate necessarily exactly when or where the 100-year flood will come, but we do know we should plan for one. And I think that when people look at visualized uncertainty, they sometimes confuse it with probability, and that we have a job in the way we communicate to make a distinction. Maybe it's a distinction without a difference, but I don't think so.
Should I put communication back in as well? You know, we used it in the last one, but it doesn't mean it's not still an important concept here.
Yeah, that's the first thing that struck me when you pulled that in, Dave, was communication. It really touches on communication.
The other element that's not in there yet is the impact. So you can have high probability, low probability, but so what if it does happen? What is the impact on the situation? I don't know how that would get factored in.
So let's see. I'm still working with my team to give me a quick entry tool so that I can just like add impact right away, because we don't have it. But let's see if there's anything that feels potentially close. Otherwise, we'll have to remember it and we'll add it, or maybe Kent or Terry, maybe one of you wants to go ahead and add it in the background, and then I'll pull it in impact. Are there other, so thanks, John, we'll get that one incorporated. Any other sparks that might have some synergy with this idea of communicating uncertainty?
Oh, I'm kind of fond of social metadata application. It's around 7 o'clock. And the reason is because you can, if you have a lot of voices, then you can communicate better because you're looking at different terms that people are using for all sorts of things, for communicating about the virus, for communicating the impacts. And the machine metadata scraping doesn't get that. It only looks at what's in the repository. And then the professionals, they are human and will add things, but they're thinking about it in a different way than a regular user would. So the layers in social metadata application are really valuable. And the social part is maybe even the most valuable from the point of view that we're talking about right now.
Yeah, this is great. Other,
that lightning talk on schools, rapid information about schools. somewhere down there. You're testing my graph knowledge.
Here we
8.
go.
Yeah.
Rapid. Yeah.
That's all about this. Brandon really talked about how they could take uncertain data and still use it and teach decision makers, school administrators, how to use uncertain data to run models about how to conduct their school reopenings, know when to make changes and that sort of thing. I really appreciated how he pushed the bookends of the two kinds of audiences together, the modelers who really were driven by a deep understanding of statistics, and the school administrators who had to make policy decisions rapidly in a information landscape where they couldn't be certain either about the data itself or about what would happen tomorrow.
I realize I'm gonna pull both of these in, social metadata application, and this, it made me think of this one, which is I feel like one of the reasons that there isn't great communication about uncertainty is that it's hard to communicate it in a simple way, because it's kind of sort of like, well, it could be this, it could be that, we don't know this, we do know that. So I think that this is an important spark to bring in as well.
What I'm hearing also is that two things. One is trust, and two is we have to work together. So people bring in different skills to this party, and we have to work together because we don't all know all the pieces. So those school administrators, they have to rely on somebody, but who do they trust to rely on? I think that is kind of key in this conversation.
So let's pause with that constellation of items and let's zoom in. And I know we only have a few minutes left. Let's just think about if there's any ideas that surface with, out of this constellation of things. And, to Bob's earlier point, this might feel a little uncomfortable in the beginning because it's so ill-defined. And I sort of encourage anyone to ask questions like Bob did about, yeah, but who are we communicating to, or what are we communicating about? What in the last one, artists kind of grounded us in a certain way of thinking, but this is now really about uncertainty. And so we could ask the question, is there a particular area where things are uncertain that communicating that uncertainty more clearly is important?
I think saying we don't know everything, but here's what we do know is really important. I think just putting that out there makes people much more comfortable with the uncertainty.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. I saw a presentation by a eminent chief of medicine who I won't name, who said that, doctors are really good at saying what they do know and not good at saying what science doesn't know. And, I think it creates a sort of issue of trust because it's sort of a lopsided communication. Mitch, were you gonna chime in?
Yeah, well, so I guess two things. In terms of uncertainty, most, relatively robust peer-reviewed journals, when they're releasing studies, have certain levels of confidence, right? Whether you're talking confidence intervals or anything based on statistics comes with that data presented. But between that and then when you hear a general news article, that information is usually missing, right? So, most of the headlines you get are, this is what the study said, or, it doesn't talk about that. So it really doesn't effectively present the level of uncertainty in a way that's, easily consumable for the general person. So yeah, we certainly have that issue.
there's a couple things that this conversation's been driving up, right? You know, along the whole line of, you know, trust. You know, I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, they talked about don't take ibuprofen, right? And so that's been like a thought that I've had. And then just a couple days ago, I realized that that might have changed, right? And so, you know, I have enough, like I actually went into PubMed and looked to see, you know, do we have any studies now that have changed that idea? And it, you know, and the same thing with, you know, A positive, ABO, that whole thing about blood type, right? And how our thoughts, how it's changed. So there's an aspect of the uncertainty over time as well, right? Like how we can, you know, how we can, and this comes back to data visualization, right in the center of that, right? Constellation is how can we visualize the uncertainty over time? And that, I think one of the things that could do is build trust, right? You know, because, you know, scientists understand how science works. And so, you know, we're always skeptical when a novel finding comes out, and then we wait for more studies. But, you know, not everybody is like deals in the scientific method, especially people who are interested in what's going on in this thing right now. So again, this brings in science communication, right? That you could actually gain trust by showing how the uncertainty changes over time for different aspects of it.
Yeah, I mean, almost something, yeah, absolutely, to that extent, if you're able to kind of display and I mean, there's so much information and so many findings right now, but if you're actually able to display what, you know, the findings are with COVID at a certain, you know, level of detail, and I don't know exactly what that level of detail is, that's informative, but also to display the kind of the current uncertainty along with those things. I think that's a pretty powerful tool that I don't know really exists and is fairly informative.
Yep. Terry, I love that idea because it's the only thought that's come up so far that that I can see actually counters the, well, I don't know if any of you are familiar with a book called Merchants of Doubt. There are actually people in society that try to sow doubt in science, and any level of uncertainty that's the lever they use, is uncertainty. So scientists aren't really certain about this, and so we don't really know anything. Of course, that's ridiculous. We do know some things. So building that trust, I love the idea of sort of showing how we've changed over time to build that trust to counter that strategy for undermining people's confidence in the science.
So let me wrap up, and there's only one more session left to today's conference, and we'll keep that, I think we'll keep that final session short and let people go back to their days a little bit early. But what I want to show is that we can take a set of ideas, you know, that we kind of converged on from inside this circle, and we can now build a new spark based on that. So what I've done is I've created a new spark here that says, can we communicate uncertainty in a way that builds trust? And I'm not writing down the whole description. I'm just saying this is a co-created idea based on conversation during the knowledge integration session of the COVID conference. I'm now adding the methodologies, the subject areas, and looks like I missed one because this rapid information about schooling. In the presentations that we kind of pulled into the middle. So this spark is like drawing a lasso around all of this. And I'll put in a few of the collaborators that I know were talking about this. And you can add yourself. I'm going to show you in a second how you can add yourself to this in a second. Let's see who else was a little bit vocal on this. Mitch. And so I'll hit submit. And we'll come back in here. Let's see if I should now be able to expand a new Spark that is the aggregate of all of these other Sparks. So let's see if okay, should come in. Maybe it hasn't updated in the graph yet, but let me show you what we should be able to do. I really wanted to see it jump in, but okay, we'll have to figure, it may take a second to propagate through the system. So when we take our next break, here's what you're gonna be able to do. There's a view. Oh, have we made this view available as a tool, or made a conference view available as a tool yet, Kent?
No.
Oh, we'll
I
have
can
to do
do that
that.
real
Okay,
quick.
so what we'll do when we get off the session is I'm gonna make a view available to you that you can click on these Sparks. And notice that, and you'll be able to click on the Sparks that we just generated. You'll also be able to click on projects or presentations, but the Sparks is where I'd like you to focus. And you see that there's a contribute button right here. If you're interested in any of the ideas that have come out today, take the next, why don't we take 15 minutes. So we'll, yeah, or maybe a little bit longer. Why don't we come back at 10 till the hour and click on the contribute button. And what it'll do is it will give you an opportunity to invest yourself in any of these ideas. You're not under any obligation to do it, right? So it's only if something is of particular interest. Now, if you're going to invest in an idea, you don't have to invest all of yourself. Each of you have been given 100 shares of yourself in the Cognitive City, and intentionally, there's no fixed currency on that. You know, we're not, everybody's shares, you can be up to yourself in deciding, up to you in deciding what your currency exchange is. But if you're interested in an idea and you think, oh, that's pretty cool, I'm not going to maybe do a lot, but I'd like to stay connected to that idea, you can put 10 shares of yourself on a particular target Spark, and you can say what that represents. You know, this could just be thought partnership. Or you could say, oh no, I'm really interested in this idea of uncertainty, you know, building trust for uncertainty, building trust through visualizing uncertainty. Maybe you want to put in, you know, 30 shares and say what that represents. We'll add the art idea as well. Maybe you want to connect yourself to that. So what we'll do in a couple minutes is we'll end this session. You can take a break, and I'd actually maybe like to allow a little bit of time for people to be able to look at these and do this. So why don't we plan to come back at the hour? So that's 2 p.m. my time. We'll come back at the hour, and we're going to be able to see how people have connected themselves to these ideas, if at all. And that will be a way to then talk about what next steps in the Cognitive City can be. As I said at the beginning, we want to create a different model for the virtual conference. And we don't really want it to be a conference first and a collaboration second. We want it to be a collaboration first, and the conference is really just the act of exploring the bounds of collaborations that can happen and ideas that can be built together. So we'll send out some information. Tom, maybe you've been sending some emails to the group. So maybe what we'll do is we'll set this view up. I realize we forgot to do it. We'll send an email to the group saying, here's how you can access the view. You can click to contribute. And then let's come back together at the hour, see what contributions have been made, and talk about next steps for the Cognitive City after this. Sound good? See you at the hour. Thanks.
Thanks.